prayer, being seen to be at prayer, and therefore, developing a certain public persona or public perception of oneself
Pride
as
of the Pharisee.
Not really a public appearance of one, but it is really one's duty. Right? So we do it as a duty rather than an appearance thing.
So that's when it's not the activity of prideful prayer.
That's right.
Okay.
Coming from an Orthodox Christian background, I have to challenge these because there is a really strong belief in our experience that prayer is action. If you were to take maybe a New Age way of looking at it, that every thought has energy in it. Every thought, however it is developed, reformed, focused on, and performed possibly, is in itself producing an energy in the world which is intimately connected to all of the energy in the world everywhere. So somebody who is contemplating suicide is adding the thought of suicide to the total consciousness of the universe, and particularly our planet. People who are thinking about releasing slaves, and the more people who realize that there are so many slaves in the world today, are creating a consciousness in the world leading to freedom of the 27 million, for example. So that's a combination of thought and action. There is a sense in where prayer is action and excessively powerful. We have examples from the life of the whole church in 2,000 years of personal prayer creating the uncreated light, the light of Jesus on the Mount of Tabor, brighter than the light of the sun. And individuals who live this contemplative light, for example, on Mount Athos, are seen, not all of them, of course, individuals are seen at night walking along the side of the mount, and you see these flashes of light. And this person is radiating this uncreated light. So they are creating this holiness, which is this whole thought process is creating a positive energy for the whole world. Now, the monastic life itself is not only prayer for oneself, although they do a fair amount of that. They often pray for the world, and therefore there is so much efficacy in how they are changing the world. People through proxy prayer are actually healing people at a distance by their own trust in the all-powerful. So there's a lot to do with prayer that is action. And on another side, somebody mentioned the Pharisees, and I was going to go there, but how we pray could be a sign of pride, more than whether we pray or not.
Thank you for these comments. In a way, that's at the core of what my second axiom was about, was talking about the way in which we don't sit, we don't meditate, we don't pray by ourselves. This has efficacy in the world in which we live. Thich Nhat Hanh has very simple examples of this. For example, he talks about the flight of what we called boat people in the 1970s from Vietnam during the war years, and saying how important it was for a member of a party on the boat to be at peace and to be settled in such dire circumstances, that this creates more settled, focused capacity to survive this pirates and storms at sea. He sees that presence and that focusedness as incredibly practical, not like airy, fairy, far removed, abstract, but very real in the boat itself.
I just kind of struck by the idea of just, you are more what you do than what you say, and like maybe prayer without action and like definitive action is a form of self-indulgence. That's all I just want to say that.
This, I kind of had a tangent in the middle of your comment because I have a couple of thoughts at once. One, about the if the contemplative, if prayer, if meditation isn't shaping how we live, what we do, what our activity is, then what is it? So, very good point. The other one thing that strikes me is the paradox of what we're doing here is, you know, there's so many words. We've got a lot of words going around this room about the contemplative. People have talked about the kind of challenge of defamiliarization within silence and so on, and there's a rich kind of non-spoken, non-wordy part of our discussion that's hard for us to do in this form. So just to observe that, I feel like I'm generating most of the words too. Time to cut this one.
Just one quick observation. I'm just wondering to what extent some of the major religions themselves have been divided with respect to the importance of contemplation rather than action. I mean, medieval Catholicism was fairly quietistic and fairly passive by comparison with the Protestant Reformation. I mean, people like John Calvin and John Knox and Benjamin Franklin all emphasized the importance of practical activities in the world and the investment of good works, as they called it. And I suppose they did so because of their own theological beliefs in predestination and stuff like that. But there was a big difference between the old Catholic view, which later got amended, of you could buy your way to salvation and the forgiveness of sins through the purchase of indulgences, shall we say, versus that strict necessity to do good in the world, which, you know, and I'm not taking the side of the Protestants over the Catholics, but there was a bit of a culture war. And I don't know very much about Islam, but certainly Shia Islam, from what little I know, places great importance on practical activities of doing good. And it just leads me to think, you know, the difference between praying and religious and contemplative beliefs amongst, shall we say, white urbanized Christians who live in relative isolation from each other, versus prayer and contemplation within a strongly bonded community of people. Like when African Americans from Mississippi and Arkansas prayed during the 50s and 60s, I mean, that prayer was definitely going to be transformed into political action, because the church was not just a house of worship, it was an organizing political center as well. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's, when you think about the divisions within major religions, the importance they give, and the increasing, shall we say, isolation and privatization of urban people, that maybe that accounts for some of the differences that we're discussing here.
I think this is a great observation. I mean, in a way, it's another sense of historical rhythm around these poles or these tensions, and you can see how social and political and spiritual contexts shifted, you know, and generated. Close to the speaker, yeah. Lost my train. It's all right. Probably wasn't a great train anyway. No, I guess what I was thinking about was the social context that generated energy at different time in religious history to emphasize one of these sides or the other, to compensate or battle against, let's use the word indulgences, on the one side or the other. So certainly this is a really important point, and I think another good part of that point is to see the diversity within these religious traditions over these kinds of questions, not as kind of owned by a religious label or a certain religious institution or vocabulary. We talked earlier about the Jesuits. I mean, you could see shifts in the contemplative and active within that tradition over its history. It didn't just stay in one place in relation to these poles as well. So there's a comment coming up here.
I'm not quite sure I can get this out properly, but it seems to me that we've been talking about doing good a great deal, but perhaps at issue isn't really doing good, because I'm not quite sure that good is a universal understanding. On the other hand, there is, I think, perhaps more of a universal understanding in terms of doing bad. And perhaps the real activity that we should look at is not doing bad. And this is something that's in the medical oath for doctors. You know, you shall not do any harm. And I think that that's perhaps something that is more important for our activity, because I think we've gotten into an awful lot of trouble paving the road to hell with good.
I guess you know, I have big respect for the comment that you're making in the sense of the righteousness that can come with a sense of, I know what the good is, and then we'll be imposing it quite gladly on those around me, and you know, that kind of prideful, to return to the topic of pride, prideful of idea of the good. The only question I would have is the how we deal with the kind of passive sense of not doing, you know, that the injunction is to not do, not do harm, not do. Isn't there the implication of a kind of a static being rather than an active one if we're not doing? Let me give you a context for this. I teach courses in critical race studies. It's part of the work I do. And sorry, okay, leaning away. I teach courses in critical race studies, and one of the big questions that will always come up is, if the objective of this learning is anti-racism, what are we for? You know, we're against this and we're against that, but what does it call you to? And this is, I would see a tension here then between the comment that we had about creativity earlier. If the spiritual, contemplative, active axis is generating something creative, how is that done if our injunction is to not something, or to anti something?
Do you want to reply to that?
Well, first of all, we are alive, and in order to be alive, we are active. We are active creatures. And I think that in the process of living, we also develop some kind of inkling towards what we want in our lives. You know, several things have been mentioned today. Someone mentioned the idea that, you know, in our very early development, up to the age 3, I believe, your parents have already instilled in you, you know, some target areas for your life. There was someone called Arete who talked about, you know, recognizing short intimations of the reality we live in. And I think it's impossible for us not to constantly be going towards something. And perhaps, and I'm not sure it's conscious at all, perhaps the only part where consciousness may have some act to play is by consciously not indulging in something that we can recognize as being bad. And so as we live our lives, we move forward. We move towards death. And I think the name of the game in good action or in action is to avoid damaging